Welcome to Leaders and Loggers, the podcast that quenches your thirst for leadership knowledge one pint at a time. Grab your favorite brew, sit back, and join us as we raise a glass to the world of leadership. I'm your host, Kevin Dawson, and each week we'll bring you refreshing conversations with leadership experts from around the globe. We'll dive into the minds of CEOs, thought leaders, and change makers, sipping on the secrets of their success. From the boardroom to the brewery, our guests share their unique perspectives on what it takes to lead in today's ever-changing world. Well, welcome to Leaders and Loggers. And on this week's podcast, I am joined by my friend, Dr. Andrea Vitz, who is an industry leader and developer of emotional sobriety training. And you might be wondering, what in the world does emotional sobriety training have to do with leadership? Well, we're going to find out today. Andrea, welcome to Leaders and Loggers.
Kevin, thank you so much for having me. It's so lovely to see you again.
Yes, I mean, it's been so fun getting to actually do real podcasts with everybody that I've met after our time in Fort Worth versus like, hey, let's do a 5-minute clip. And for me personally, like that's not enough time.
We could have talked for 20 hours. Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, this is not enough time for me. Like, I don't like this time limit, but we've got to do 40 of them in 2 days. I'm like, okay, we'll do what we have to do. And then we're like, oh, I'm going to bring these people onto my podcast and we'll do this for real.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you.
So before we get in today, I am drinking Radiant Haze IPA, which is actually a collaboration brew between Toppling Goliath Brewing Company and Radiant Beer Company. And these are out of, it says brewed in beautiful Decorah, Iowa. So cheers.
Cheers. I'm going to be drinking a protein shake.
Hey, to each their own, to each their own. I mean, a friend of mine, he was on the podcast. He's like, I'm not really a beer drinker, but I'll bring, bourbon and a cigar. I'm like, that's fine. Like, this is just us hanging out, and we're sharing drinks, whatever we like to drink.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do find it really ironic to be on a Leaders and Loggers podcast as a sobriety educator, because a lot of people think, sobriety, what the heck is she doing on this show, right? But I really want to teach sobriety in a completely different way today that might blow some people's minds.
So. Well, it's funny you bring that up because like I had our friend Jason Howe on, and I'm thinking, okay, Jason, I know your story, and while his sobriety had to deal more with drug usage than alcohol, I was prepared to drink a non-alcoholic beer, and he's like, no, I've already got he texts me a beer from like Nebraska or Missouri or wherever he's from. I'm like, all right, if we're going to do that, then we're changing this out.
Yeah. Great. Yeah.
But I was ready. I was ready for it.
That's awesome. Yeah. Jason's a great guy. He's got a great thing going too.
Yes.
By the way, I just want to point out that I love your fridge in the background. That access point, it's just.
Yes. That all long term, whenever we get to maybe episode 200, I'm hoping to have the podcast bar studio built.
Yes.
Where my dad's favorite show was Cheers, and during the pandemic, it was on Netflix. So I'm like, I'm going to watch this. I want that bar and that studio to feel very much like, your Norm pulling up to the bar at Cheers.
Everyone's going to know you, buddy.
Yes. And like, I want that, like, hey, come sit down, have a drink. Let's talk about how we become better leaders. And we'll just turn the cameras and the lights on.
Oh, so good.
Well, Andrea, I would love for our listeners to just learn a little bit about your story and how you came to be an expert and developer in emotional sobriety training.
Okay, absolutely. So my expertise comes from my own deficit, emotionally speaking. So about maybe, close to 15 years ago now, I was really struggling with excessive defensiveness, childishness, dishonesty, jealousy, you name it. My relationships were in discord. I was already a doctor at this point. So I know you might be thinking, like, how did she become a doctor? But the truth is that all of my dysfunction, so to speak, was so normal. It was everywhere. So I didn't even really notice it as being a problem until somebody in my life that I really trusted as like a mentor and a leader said, I often think like the way that you present yourself isn't who you truly say you are. And so that was a real wake up call for me to really shape up. And as I continuously attempted to change, I found myself kind of reverting back to old behaviors, and just not finding a way out. And so, like, there has to be a solution that will work for me. And I recognized what was happening for me is I was addicted not just to the behaviors, but to the emotion itself that preceded those behaviors. So I realized I don't need sobriety from drugs and alcohol. What I need is sobriety from my emotional state, right? So that's really what I teach. I teach emotional sobriety. It's getting control over your biochemical addiction because our emotions are chemicals. And just like booze or drugs or sugar, we have a chemistry. Our body gets used to making it and therefore thinks it's going to have it to survive or need it to survive. So it happens with anger, it happens with fear, it happens with embarrassment and guilt and shame, you name it. If you have a specific emotion that you've made readily, like since you were a child, then you're most likely addicted to that chemistry.
It's interesting. I've learned a lot about uh, mental health and the chemicals in the brain over the last couple of years in dealing with my own personal mental health crisis, is not necessarily for me, but for a loved one, in my reaction to that. And just, it's been interesting to see, like, as I've come out of that, like the struggles I've had, because like I was, the brain chemistry changed
Yeah.
as I was reacting. And I was like, wait, why am I still feeling this way when I'm not there? But the brain is such an interesting thing. And it is surprising to a lot of people when you talk about, well, you have an addiction. Like, well, I don't struggle with alcohol. I don't struggle with drugs. Like, what do you mean I have an addiction? Like, no, you are addicted to, as you say, the emotional aspect of something.
Right.
And
And that emotional aspect is what drives you to drink or do drugs in excess. Because what we're doing there is we have an internal chemistry that we're attempting to change via an external chemistry, a chemical from the outside. Now, a lot of people are, just drinking a beer because they like the taste of it, right? Like this is just it's a craft, it's an art, it's an experience where most people are thinking about alcohol the moment they wake up because they hate their life or because they are afraid to look somebody in the eye. They feel like they need that liquid courage, right? So we want to look at our emotional state, where it came from our past, and recognize that a lot of the things that or situations that cause us fear or embarrassment or anger are really just similar in theme to our childhood experiences, our conditioning, our trauma, our traditions, our obligations, things like that. So that's what I do. I developed a curriculum, which is a hardcore training. It's absolutely amazing. It works 100 times out of 100 if somebody really applies themselves. It is finding the belief that you have taken on as an actual truth from your childhood about who you are. Maybe you believe you're not valuable, you're abandonable, you're rejectable, you're not good enough, you're not lovable, you're never going to be enough, right? You're never going to have enough. Maybe you grew up in poverty, or maybe even it wasn't like a severe trauma. Perhaps you just witnessed something that shaped something about you, or somebody's interpretation about somebody else stuck in you as truth about you. And so, because of that belief being so real to you, you bring that into your adult life. I like jokingly say, we're really our children in the way that we think about ourselves and sometimes in the way that we behave, but our meat just kept growing. Like we just got bigger and we're like, okay, what do we do now? Because I'm still left with just these skills that I learned as a child. And here's the thing, like our parents, our caretakers, they're in the same boat. They're utilizing their same skills that they learned, even if they were traumatic or harmful or destructive. And we take those as this is the norm for our tribe. So in my curriculum, what we do, and this is why emotional sobriety is so profound for the leaders that I teach and the conferences that I speak at, people are pulling me out and saying, like, what? Like, this has been missing from my life. It's the why you feel that way in the first place. That's what the belief shows you. So you could take like a little example. You could say, when's the last time I was threatened, angry, afraid, etc.? Try to find that. Like, let's have everybody right now just try to find the last time you were angry, upset, afraid. And I want you to ask yourself, why did I get afraid? Why did I get upset? Why did I get angry? Right? Maybe it's because somebody did something or said something, or you got bad news. And with that information, I want you to see what your brain did with it. Your brain processed it through a filter, or what I call a trauma filter. And it meant something about you, right? Because my wife did this, it means this about me. It means I'm not good enough. It means I'm unworthy. It means I'm rejectable. It means I'm abandonable. Because my client said this, it means I'm never going to be good enough. It means that I'm going to be fired. It means that I'm not a good leader, right? There's so many different potentials and examples that we can use here. But I want people to access what's truly theirs. Because when you find that, this is like a pot of gold. It is the most valuable thing you could know about yourself, especially as a leader. And I mean a leader in company, in your family, in your relationship. If you could figure out what triggers you, what creates that chemistry to come into your body from your brain, then you have what most people will never have. And that is just emotional awareness. Okay? Emotional awareness, our emotional intelligence. This is one of the most important things that we can have in our life as leaders. But when we get awareness, that's not the end. We have to engage in more. Like, we have to figure out why we're triggered, what we're feeling, recognize that feeling's an addiction and it's just chemistry. And most importantly, we have to look at the behavior that follows that chemistry. Because remember, whenever you drink something that's a chemical, you're going to get a little drunk, right? A little intoxicated. If you drink a lot of it, Kevin, right, what happens?
Oh yeah, you can't even like, yeah, you can't function. We'll talk about it since we're drinking. Like, I don't drink a whole bunch, and I don't really drink to ever get drunk. But there have been a few times where I have gotten drunk because it was a best friend's bachelor party, and we're drinking in a safe environment. We weren't going anywhere, but I mean, I drank half a bottle of whiskey and threw it up.
Yeah.
And felt miserable. I'm like, why did we do this?
Right. So everybody here who's ever had alcohol or drugs in their life, I'm raising my hand, guys. I get it. I've done such horrible things while drunk, and all of it comes from being intoxicated. The subconscious mind turns on as a default, right? So all of your bad habits, right, come out, and you've lost the power of choice in terms of your behavior. You're not walking the line anymore, right? You can't possibly make a decision that is a sober, level-headed, clear decision when you're under the influence. And the same thing goes for our emotional state, right? The quality of our life is dependent on your emotional state. It's not based on mindset. It's not based on physical fitness, monetary income, nothing. It's based on your emotional state. It's how you feel about you and the world around you, your chemistry. So what I teach people is to find why they feel the way they feel, what they're actually feeling, what they're actually doing while under the influence of that emotion, okay? And begin to train, repetition-based training. Everyone understands that. We don't get better without repetition, right? Repetition-based training to completely transform your perspective so that when something outside of you happens, nothing changes inside of you. That, my friend, makes a solid leader, right? You become somebody who is unassailable when you get strong enough emotionally speaking. And I'm not talking about like self-control in terms of like shoving down how you feel and really putting on a brave face and making sure you show up as like the man or like the leader. It's not about that. It's about standing in front of anything and actually being okay. Because when I'm clear of those chemistries, like of that chemistry, I'm not thinking about me at all. If I'm with you, Kevin, and I'm leading you, and you're having a breakdown, or you are sad, you're afraid, you're maybe being defiant, maybe you're fighting me. I'm immovable in that moment, and I'm just there with you. And I totally understand you because I've done the work to understand me. Does that make sense? We're all the
Yeah.
same. I'm sitting looking at you. I'm like, oh, I know exactly what he's feeling right now. I can feel it. He probably comes from his past. I'm just going to sit with this guy till his chemistry calms down because I got him. I got his back. No matter what you say to me, it doesn't matter because I'm so good. Like I took care of myself so much. I've done the training that this is just about you now. And that's what makes us great leaders. Leaders, we don't have the luxury of taking things personally, of making something about ourselves. That's the opposite of a definition of a leader, right?
Right.
So that's it.
You're right about the being a leader and not being able to take things personally, which is hard for a lot of people. I know as I put myself out there in a more public facing role with a lot of different things, like there's a lot of things that people have said about me, and I'm like, I just can't put myself into taking a look at it because it's very easy to go, oh, why'd they say that? I didn't do that. I'm like, and you just go down that rabbit hole that just makes you feel like crap. And I've got to a point where it's like, okay, people are going to say what they want. It doesn't bother me because their emotional state in writing those things or saying those things are coming from someplace else. So they're angry not at me, but whatever you know I'm saying has triggered them in such a way that is caused this emotional reaction.
Absolutely. So you get that. And so you even said this, but like I think what's missing from there, first of all, we're so deficient in emotional training. Like we talk about physical training, mental training, we talk about, spiritual health, and we talk about emotional health, but we don't talk about emotional training. I feel like at Lifted Academy, that's my school with my husband, Lifted Academy, we teach emotional training in a way that no one else is doing it. And it's because we're so deficient emotionally speaking as a culture. I mean, we even use it, we use hysteria, we use drama, we use immaturity and self-centered perspective or selfish perspective in order to entertain ourselves too. Like our shows and our movies, and it's rare to find a really balanced, level-headed entertainment. Like it's really, really challenging. So when we do this training, what we're looking for is the behaviors that follow our emotional state first, because they're the most obvious symptom of what I call emotional insobriety. Now, if you feel offended by that, that's totally okay, because you might be thinking like, well, I'm not unsober. Like I'm pretty good. We're all the same, guys. Like we're all the same. We all get defensive, childish. We all get judgmental. We all lie sometimes. We all have secondary addictions where we do too much of something. And remember, all those things are secondary to the one primary addiction, in my opinion, and that's our emotional addiction. So if we could shift that perspective, if we could increase our level of understanding of ourselves, we understand everyone else. Pretty fun stuff.
Abs- Absolutely. It's always interesting to me, and you're right about the emotional training aspect. We don't do enough of that. I've sat through emotional intelligence seminars, and those were all like sales focused, so you could learn to understand the emotions of your buyer,
Yeah.
and try to be understand, okay, do this, is fear motivating certain objections, is it anger, all those different things, and while those are good, it doesn't get to the point of, okay, how does this actually apply to me?
Yes.
you
That's
know
it.
it it's like I remember sitting in this conference where they brought in this emotional intelligence expert, and they were great. I mean, it was great information about really understanding other people's emotions, and I love people watching, because I like to see what's going on, and I feel like I have a good read on people.
Yeah.
and being very people focused. I still remember in college, one of my college classes, it was interpersonal communication. And the professor actually assigned, he said, pair up, and here's your assignment. You're going to go somewhere public, the two of you, and you're just going to observe someone for 20, 30 minutes and create a narrative of what's going on in their life just by observing them. Don't interact with them, just watch. And it was so fascinating to sit. We went to Barnes and Nobles and sat in the cafe and watched this couple come into the cafe and watch, we could see their facial expressions and we couldn't hear what they were saying, but we wrote this whole story about like they were planning some sort of dinner party and the husband hadn't, done something because the wife was getting on to him like, why haven't you done this? And because her facial reactions, her emotions looked like she was upset and he was looking defensive.
Yeah.
And by the time they get their coffee and whatnot, and she's, had her coffee and a slice of cheesecake, her emotions had shifted to more positive and he looked more positive. And we're like, maybe she was just hangry. Maybe that was the issue.
Well, she probably had some kind of thought, maybe of the past, right? Maybe
Yeah.
she felt a little resentment. Maybe she felt a little bit sad. And then that facial expression is that secondary, that emotionally triggered behavior that she just demonstrated. And then she was able to maybe change her chemistry through some other way. But I love that story. It's so great. I feel like when I work with leaders, like I do executive coaching for executives and professionals, and I often come into companies, well, my husband and I even will come into companies and we'll totally shift culture just by teaching people. It's not really about self improvement and it's not really about being or understanding somebody else's emotion. It's about self responsibility. It's about self responsibility. So if we take each individual, including the leaders, and we take them through this training, everything in their life, everything in their company changes because now everybody's only concerned with making sure that they're good, that they're solid, that they're level headed, clear, and peaceful in the realest sense, that they're not triggerable. Now you have a completely different environment, right? There's no such thing as a toxic environment when no one's intoxicated. There's no such thing as an intoxicated or a toxic relationship if no one's intoxicated with their emotions, right? Because that's really what it is. Think about that. We're drunk on our emotions. We're addicted to getting drunk on our emotions. And that doesn't mean that we like it. In fact, I don't know any real alcoholic or drug addict that likes it. Addiction is defined as you've now lost the power of choice. So we have to train so that we have a new default state, a new perspective. So if I'm talking to you, I would never even be able to see what you're saying as an offense against me. I would never be able to do that because I've done that work. There's not a channel for that now, right? It's pretty powerful stuff.
That is powerful. And it's interesting to hear you say that by focusing on getting leaders to be able to get to this state, that it completely and radically changes the culture. It gets rid of the toxic culture, which, when I talk to a lot of leaders, because culture change is usually what I come in to work with and in working through leadership development. We talk through like, okay, what are your values and what are the issues? And if we go through that process to identify those things, but not once have I ever asked and thought about the emotional connection to those things. And that to me is fascinating.
It's all of it, Kevin. It's
Yeah.
it's absolutely all of it. And all the CEOs I've worked with have said the exact same thing. I never would have thought that emotional sobriety is what I was missing. I never would have thought this. This is unbelievable. My marriage is different. I'm not drinking as much. I don't vape like crazy all day long anymore, right? I'm able to be so present in meetings. I'm able to not take things personally. I'm able to have hard conversations with my employees. Because a lot of people think that just because they have a boss, a CEO, a leader, a manager, that person is like this, they're not human anymore. They aren't able to see them as human, right? Like they're not able to sit down and be like, hey, can we just talk about something for a sec? Like everything is personal, everything's an attack. and they fear their leaders. They're intimidated by their leaders, right? So if we could teach leaders to be totally peaceful, totally level, totally humble, by the way, huge missing point, totally vulnerable. One of the first things I teach my people, and if anyone just takes this with them, they will just add a ton of value to your life. I just love giving stuff away here. But if you just go to work tomorrow or wherever you're a leader and you just show a little bit of vulnerability with somebody who's made a mistake, hey, man, it's totally cool. In fact, let me tell you the story of this time I totally messed up. It instantly connects you. Like, oh, dude, like, trust me, this one time, boom, I got it. I got you, buddy. You're good. Their chemistry not being altered, that employee now is going to trickle down to the next person that person talks to and their client and their ability to make a sale for you or their ability to um, bring something to completion for you because they're not totally offended. They're not disgruntled. They're not afraid of you. They're like, wow, I dig that guy or that girl, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I tell people this all the time, like, be vulnerable with people. And I remember the very first time I ever saw a leader embrace vulnerability.
Yeah.
And it was Marcus Buckingham, who is one of my favorite authors and strengths based leadership people. And he was speaking at a John Maxwell event, which funny enough is like coming up in a couple of weeks is John Maxwell's Live to Lead, where I watched him speak, and he's up there talking about the research out of his latest book, and he gets 2/3 of the way through his stuff, and then he just stops and said, I really can't keep going without saying something to somebody. And he goes, can I just be open with you about what's going on in my life? And shares about how his ex-wife had been caught up in the big college admission scandal, and how the FBI had raided their house, guns drawn with their kids at home, and arrested their mom in front of the kids, and they're all freaking out, not knowing what's going on. And that was like 3 weeks prior to him giving this talk, so he was still dealing with all of that. And it was the first time I heard a leader who gets paid a lot of money to get up on stages and speak go, can I just tell you what's going on in my personal life and be okay with that? And it was the first time I realized the power of vulnerability.
Oh, yeah. And humility. Humility to me is not self deprecation. It's not, I'm less than you. It's that we're exactly the same.
Yeah.
And we all make mistakes. And the reason that we make those mistakes are for the same reason in mechanism. So that means if in my book, if you ever read my book, it's called The You You've Never Met, it will challenge you to find your exact anatomy, the things that make up your own emotional insobriety. So, what's your belief? What's the filter? What's the emotion you're addicted to? What's the behaviors that you demonstrate that make up this, what I call intoxicated identity? Like the Hulk version of you that comes out, right? When your wife or your boss or somebody says something to you that kind of irks you the wrong way or doesn't do something you expected or does something and you expected it was different, it would be different. Whatever you find out about you, being able to see that that mechanism that creates that intoxicated identity is identical in me. It's identical in you, Kevin. It's identical in your mom or your sister or your brother. All of your clients, all of your employees. If we can just come together and learn emotional sobriety individually, we take all the pain out of our life. Because us not being able to feel that same pain chronically for the same reasons, now we're peaceful, we're level headed, we shine light instead of like this shadow onto the world, right? And
Yeah.
everyone in our life is affected. The same way if you bring your work home and it's a negative, that affects your marriage, that affects your children, that affects your neighbors and your friends. You're going to be bringing this version of you home that is open and peaceful and excited and understands how to do it. That's the reason that we mess up in life, the reason that we overreact, that we have emotional overwhelm, that we do things we would never consciously choose is because we don't know how to do it different. And so that was what was missing for me. I read hundreds of books. I went to seminars. I had affirmations posted everywhere, right? Just ask my husband. He'll be like, oh, yeah, I remember your affirmations, right? I remember you trying this. Everything was lacking one thing, and that was how. How do I do it though? But how? How do I forgive that person? How do I regulate my chemistry? How do I have a better relationship with my partner? How do I not get overwhelmed and anxious when I'm about to enter a meeting and I'm the leader? Right? I know the how. I've done all the hard work, right? I figured it out, and you are absolutely capable. Everybody who's listening to this right now is totally capable of achieving emotional sobriety and a practice of emotional sobriety, and you can just keep advancing and advancing. The same way with physical training. There's always more room on the bar. There's always more room on the barbell. You can always get stronger. You can always squat more. With emotional training, it's the same thing. You could always shift your perspective even more. You can always handle it more maturely. You can always regulate your emotions even more precisely through your own will. You're like your own alchemist, you know? You're just like changing things in your life by your own hand. And it's fantastic. It's so empowering. And the self-esteem that comes from it is unparalleled because you did it, right? You did it. You did the reps. You were the one that sat down where you were and decided, I'm going to take responsibility for my life. I'm going to take responsibility for how I feel. Even if it's because I'm hurt because of the past, I'm going to decide to not give them my power anymore. And you know, you hear that a lot, right? Like, stop giving your power away. I used to say, but how? How do I
Yeah.
stop? What does that even mean? I love teaching that. So if anybody needs me for any, I love talking to people. I love just giving it away and sharing my story. Anytime I can give anybody relief, that's my purpose in life. You know, I'm also a doctor of chiropractic. So I feel like every single career I've ever dipped my toe into or mastered or become an expert in I'm a hurt healer.
Yeah.
Just want to
That,
take the pain away, guys.
yeah. You know, it's interesting, you know, to hear all of those things. And as I think back to, I mean, my own personal hurts and things like that, and how do I get past those, and in whether I give someone power or not. If I choose not to, I'm like, okay, I'm going to own these things. Like, this person did this, but you know, and it made me feel this way, but I'm not going to use that to, you know, do something else with it. Like, okay, let me stop with, okay, yes, they did this, I feel this, why do I feel this, how do I process that in a healthy way to move on. And I think a lot of people do struggle with that. And I know there's a lot of great resources out there for people who are like, what do I do, how do I deal with these things? But if somebody's listening to this and go, okay, I need to learn how to do that, where do I start?
Yeah, where do you start? Well, you can get a copy of my book, again, the you've never met. But I think that the easiest way to get a leg up on this is to recognize, one, that it's a chemical. Make your emotion objective, right? When you feel something, that to you, that feels totally real, right? That feels like there's nothing possible outside of you that anyone would disagree that you have the right to feel this way. Okay? So, yes, you do have the right to feel whatever you feel, but recognize that your emotion that you're feeling right now is chemistry. And you feel it because of a way that you believe about yourself. Now, I know that's true because if I were to say, Kevin, you're a pineapple, did you feel angry when I said that?
No, I was thinking about, am I under the sea with a starfish as a friend?
Exactly. Right? Right. Now, if I said, Kevin, you're not very important. Okay. So
different emotion. Yeah.
so the only reason that we feel something negative or destructive with one of those statements is because you believe one of them. Now, if you 100% without a doubt knew you were important, And I said that, you wouldn't have felt anything either. So that's what I want to challenge everybody is find out what it is you're believing about yourself. Every time you get triggered emotionally, why? That's giving your power away. That's using energy to make and really anchor your emotional state. You're using energy to do that. You're using power to do that. And you're getting really, really small, or you're getting really aggressive and defensive, but find out why it triggered you. So I like to ask this question over and over again. That upset me because I believe it means this about me. Okay. So what does it mean about me? It means, let's see, the fact that she took out her phone at lunch means that whatever's on that phone is way more interesting to her than I am. Okay, great. And if it were true that what was on the phone was more interesting than you, what would that mean about you? Well, it would mean that I'm not good enough. Okay, great. And if that were true, what would that mean? You see how we could do this until
Yeah.
we get to the deepest, most profound actual reason? And 100 times out of 100 times, 100 times, you're going to find the moment in your childhood that you learned that as a truth.
It's
Oh,
am-
I remember that.
it's amazing how much of our childhood plays a role in our adulthood.
Mhm.
And it's things that we would think about like, well, that doesn't seem like such a big deal now.
Right? But when you're a child, you have no experience, you have no wisdom, you have no reason, and everything in your life is about you as a child. You're so self-centered. Everything's about you. You're literally think of yourself as a little kid inside a closet, kind of peeking out and looking out around and going, okay, what does that mean about me? And is it okay if I say this? And how do I react when this happens? And I'm trying to create my identity by virtue of looking around me and mimicking the people around me. I mimic how they feel. I mimic what they say. I mimic what they do. I mimic how they think. I mimic their beliefs because that is all I see. I can't just make something up as a child in that realm. I can't choose my own identity. And that's one of the things my curriculum does is it really urges people to look for where they're mimicking also and really choose a new identity for themselves, right? Like unveil who you truly are. If you really are a leader, then you can absolutely push yourself to train in a way that makes you emotionally sober, an example of an emotionally sober person, a lighthouse for people. And somebody's going to see you and you're going to have a totally different reputation. You know, I've worked with a couple CEOs now where their reputation was they're not approachable, they're high strung, they're addicts, they're greedy, that you name it, right? I've heard it all, but those CEOs now are totally different to their employees and to their teams. They're approachable, they're not addicted to drugs and alcohol, they are vulnerable, they are humble, and they're not triggerable in the ways that they used to be because it's not about them anymore. They don't believe the things about themselves anymore that they used to, right? So think about that too. When you think about your belief that triggers you, and there's probably several, there's probably about 3 to 5. But if you think about the belief that triggers you, remember that belief was imprinted into your mind from the interpretation of a child. Okay? It didn't come from a mighty power, it came from a little kid who was just trying to figure out what it meant. Not real. So you can stop, you can parent yourself, you can hold yourself, you can coach yourself and be like, you know what, buddy? That's just, it's not true,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's just not true. Yeah. It seems so
It's
easy, right?
yeah. 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 It's
Yeah, no
all
big deal. No
no
big
big
deal.
deal.
But
No
the
big
reason
deal.
that, yeah, the reason we do training is because the subconscious mind requires repetition to have a new default state. So if between the ages of 0 and 7, you are in hypnotic state, your brain waves are such that you're a sponge and everything is real around you. So if you're getting hit by a parent, or if you're abandoned by a parent, or if you don't have parents, right? Or if something happens to you emotionally, if you're manipulated, if you're guilted and shamed, you are absorbing that and it is just a part of you, right? It's not a choice. It's not a choice. But now you have a choice. Now you have a choice. And you can decide, like, okay, now I'm a grown up. I have these beliefs that I decided were true when I was a kid, but they're really not true. So I'm going to do the work to change them through repetition. I'm going to change the way I think. I'm going to change the way I feel. I'm going to change the way I behave. And there's a precise and clear cut way to do that. And I know that anyone that has a heart and a pulse can do it. It's just so, it's a lot simpler than it seems to get over that. It might seem far-fetched, but it's not. I mean, I've seen hundreds and hundreds of people do it now.
You know, it just like everything in life, you know, if you want to make that change, whether it's, hey, I want to lose weight, I want to run a marathon, I want to learn how to fly an airplane, like you learn the skills and you practice it, and it happens. And I, you know, and same as you said, with doing this, doing the training and doing the work to work on your emotional state, like you'll get there.
Yeah. Yeah, if I can do it, you can do it. Okay. Just so everybody hears me. Like if you had a side by side contrast of me from before I did my training to now, it's not recognizable. Not recognizable. I swear I'm smarter. I have more clarity. A lot of people say that, like, God, you always know exactly what to say. And I'm like, yeah, because I have clarity. I'm not full of chemistry. I'm not, you're just as smart as me. In fact, you're probably smarter. But all I did was I was desperate. Like you said, anytime you want something or desire something, you go for it. And I was desperate. I'm like, my daughter's going to be just like me. She's going to feel the way I feel. She's going to think the way I think. She's going to behave the way I behave. And I don't like this for myself. So I don't want this for her. And so I was desperate and I did this work. And once I got to the end, I reverse engineered what I did. And you have to get so humble doing that, because it's like, yeah, I was full of crap here and I was full of crap there and I lied about that, and it's so fun to go that deep. It really is fun, because then there's nothing hidden in you. Everything's scary in the dark, you guys, right?
Yeah.
Everything's scary in the dark. Like, oh, what's that? It just brushed up against my leg. Right? I promise you, your secrets or the things that are holding you back or the things you don't want to look at from your childhood, they're a lot scarier because you're not looking at them.
Yep.
Yeah, you got this.
Yeah, it's that scary shadow you saw over there is not really that scary. It's just the light was reflecting off of your stuffed bunny rabbit that made it look scary.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Once it comes into the light, everything's easy. And
Absolutely.
that's what we like to do. We like to make things objective. We like to make them easy, right? Simple.
I like simple.
I like simple. I'm a huge fan. Let's not overcomplicate emotions. They're way overcomplicated. Don't have to be. That was awesome.
Well, Andrea, it is time for last call. And so for our listeners this week, what is something that they can do to be a better leader?
Ooh, okay. So I'm going to give you an assignment. Okay. So I'm going to have you pull out your phones and you're going to send a text to 33777. And I want you to type the word lifted. Think about your life getting lifted in that message and hit send. And when you do that, you're going to be prompted to put in your email, where I'm going to send you a very, very super progressive assignment. It's going to leap you forward in life to help you find your specific emotionally triggered behaviors and really start looking at yourself from a very humble, vulnerable, and self-responsible place. Okay? And if you have any questions about that or you need help, I will do a free call with you, because I just want to hold your hand when you start to realize these things about yourself and give you some tips for the next day at work, something to do for the rest of the week. Okay?
I love it. And I love it. I just did it. So anybody who doesn't think that it's that hard, it's not. I literally just did it while she was talking.
Yeah, 33777 and the word lifted.
Well, if you didn't catch that, that will be in the screen down below if you're watching this. And if you're listening, you can find it in the show notes. We'll put that there as well. But besides that, Andrea, how can our listeners connect with you, find your book, things along those
Oh
lines?
yeah, sure. So on my book, you go on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, any real bookstore online, and just type in "the you've never met" and get that revised edition. It is the curriculum. The first part of my curriculum is within that book. You'll get a huge jump start just reading that book. Okay. You can also email me, Dr. Andrea Vitz at gmail.com. That's DRANDREA, V as in Victor, ITZ at gmail.com. I always answer my emails. So don't be shy. It doesn't matter how many I get. I make sure that everybody knows they're just as important as the person that came before them and the person that will come after them. So that's it.
I love it. Well, Andrea, thank you so much for joining me today for a pint in conversation and helping share with all of our listeners and me what emotional sobriety is and how that affects us as leaders.
You're so welcome. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to help your people.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you so much for listening to Leaders and Loggers. If you have not subscribed, I hope you hit subscribe. We're on all the major streaming platforms. And if you thought what you heard today was really good, I hope you share it with another leader who needs to hear this conversation today. And you can join us next week for another Pint in Conversation.